Hey everyone, and a huge welcome back to the channel. Before we step into the past, I truly hope you're feeling great today, sending you all positive energy and wishing you nothing but the very best health. Ever wondered what it was like to witness the final act of Imperial China? Imagine an empire so vast it dwarfed all others, ruled not by ethnic Han Chinese, but by fierce horsemen from the north, the Manchus. This is the story of the Qing Dynasty, China's last imperial dynasty. It's a tale of breathtaking conquest, dazzling cultural heights, crushing internal decay, and a dramatic, humiliating collapse that thrust China into the modern world. Forget everything you thought you knew about ancient China. This is the dramatic, complex, and often brutal final chapter of the world's longest continuous civilization. Get ready, because we're journeying back nearly 300 years to witness the rise and fall of China's final empire. Picture Northeast Asia in the early 1600s. While the Ming Dynasty ruled China, looking increasingly tired and plagued by problems, a powerful force was gathering strength beyond the Great Wall. These were the Manchus, descendants of the fierce Jurchen tribes who had once ruled northern China as the Qing Dynasty. Led by a brilliant and ambitious chieftain named Nurhaci, they united the scattered Manchu clans and neighboring groups like the Mongols. Nurhaci wasn't just a warrior, he was a nation builder. He created a new writing system for Manchu, organized his people into the highly effective 8 banners military social system, think elite warrior clans with distinct flags, and declared a new dynasty in 1616, the later Qing. His son, Hong Taiji, pushed further. He renamed his people, Manchu, to forge a stronger identity and, crucially, changed the dynasty's name to Qing in 1636, meaning pure or clear, signaling their intent to replace the corrupt Ming. The stage was set for conquest. The Ming dynasty was buckling under massive peasant rebellions, crippling corruption, and natural disasters. One rebel leader, Li Zicheng, even captured the Ming capital, Beijing, in 1644, causing the last Ming emperor to take his own life. This chaos was the Qing's golden opportunity. A Ming general guarding the Great Wall, desperate to stop Li Zicheng, made a fateful decision. He opened the gates at Shanhai Pass and invited the powerful Qing armies inside to help restore order. Big mistake. The Qing, led by the regent Prince Dorgan, ruling for the young Emperor Xuanzhi, didn't come to help the Ming, they came to conquer. They swept into Beijing, crushed Li Zicheng's forces, and declared the Qing dynasty the new rulers of China. It was a stunning takeover. But conquering the capital was just the beginning. It took decades of brutal warfare to subdue Ming loyalists scattered across southern China. Resistance was fierce, and the Qing responded with ruthless campaigns, but by the 1680s, under the remarkable Kangxi Emperor, the conquest was essentially complete. A people from the frigid northeastern frontier now ruled the most populous and sophisticated empire on earth. The early Qing emperors, Kangxi, Yongzheng, and Qianlong, ruling from 1661 to 1796, were incredibly capable administrators and military leaders. This era is often called the High Qing or the Prosperous Age, a time when China reached a peak of power, wealth, and territorial expansion. Emperor Kangxi, who ruled for an astonishing 61 years, was a powerhouse. He personally led military campaigns to finally crush powerful rebellious generals in the south, secured China's borders against Mongol threats, conquered Taiwan, and extended Qing influence deep into Central Asia and Tibet. He wasn't just a conqueror, he was a scholar. He patronized massive literary projects like compiling the Kangxi Dictionary and sponsored science and the arts. He actively toured the empire, inspecting waterworks and trying to understand the needs of his vast realm. His son, the Yongzheng Emperor, was a tough, no-nonsense ruler focused on efficiency and rooting out corruption. He centralized control, reformed finances, and worked hard to strengthen the state apparatus. Then came Qianlong, Kangxi's grandson, ruling for 60 years. Qianlong presided over the absolute zenith of Qing power and territorial extent. His armies campaigned deep into Central Asia, modern Xinjiang, crushed rebellions in Tibet and Sichuan, and brought Mongolia firmly under Qing control. The empire stretched further than it ever had under the Ming, encompassing Tibet, Xinjiang, Mongolia, Manchuria, and Taiwan. This was China at its largest imperial footprint. Qianlong was also a lavish patron of the arts. He amassed an enormous personal art collection, commissioned magnificent palaces, expanding the Summer Palace, and saw the creation of exquisite porcelain, jade carvings, and paintings. He fancied himself the ultimate Confucian ruler and a great poet, though his poetry wasn't highly regarded. Trade boomed, particularly through the port of Canton, Guangzhou, where European merchants, mainly the British East India Company, were confined and eagerly exchanged silver for Chinese tea, silk, and porcelain. The imperial treasury overflowed. On the surface, China under the High Qing seemed invincible, prosperous, and perfectly ordered according to Confucian ideals. The emperors presented themselves as benevolent rulers of all peoples within their vast domains: Han Chinese, Manchu, Mongol, Tibetan, Uyghur, and others. But how did a relatively small group of Manchus rule over the massive Han Chinese population? This was the Qing Dynasty's central challenge. They were outsiders, conquerors, and they knew it. To maintain their distinct identity and power, they enforced strict policies. Manchu language was the language of government and the military. The Q order was perhaps the most visible symbol of submission. All Han Chinese men were forced to shave the front of their heads and braid the remaining hair into a long ponytail, or Q, adopting the Manchu hairstyle. Refusal meant death. Manchu women were forbidden to bind their feet, a Han Chinese practice, while Han women continued the painful tradition. The Manchu elite lived in separate walled quarters within cities, like the Tartar City in Beijing, and were initially forbidden to intermarry with Han Chinese or engage in trade. They were expected to maintain their martial traditions through the Eight Banners system. However, the Qing were also pragmatists. They knew they needed Han Chinese cooperation to govern effectively. They adopted the Ming bureaucratic system almost wholesale. The civil service exams based on Confucian classics remained the primary path to becoming a government official. Thousands of Han Chinese scholars continued to staff the vast imperial bureaucracy, running the day-to-day administration of provinces, counties, and towns. The Qing emperors, especially Kangxi and Qianlong, went to great lengths to portray themselves as ideal Confucian rulers, mastering Chinese classics, performing ancient rituals, and patronizing Han Chinese arts and scholarship. They upheld the traditional social structure centered on Confucian values, respect for hierarchy, family loyalty, and the scholar gentry class. They also skillfully co-opted other groups. They formed alliances with Mongol elites through marriage. Many Qing emperors had Mongol mothers, and shared Tibetan Buddhism with the Mongols and Tibetans as a unifying spiritual force. They incorporated loyal Han Chinese soldiers into the military, creating the Green Standard Army. So, the Qing system was a complex balancing act, maintaining Manchu privilege and identity while utilizing Han Chinese administrative skills and upholding traditional Chinese systems and values to legitimize their rule. For over a century, this delicate balance worked remarkably well. Life for ordinary people during the High Qing was shaped by centuries-old patterns, but the long peace and stability allowed the population to explode. Thanks to new crops from the Americas like corn and sweet potatoes, which could be grown on marginal hillsides, and generally stable conditions, China's population skyrocketed. It roughly doubled from about 150 million in 1700 to over 300 million by 1800. This was unprecedented growth. The vast majority, over 80%, were peasants living in rural villages. Their lives were hard and revolved around farming. Rice dominated the fertile south, while wheat and millet were staples in the north. Peasants paid taxes, mostly in grain or silver, and owed labor to the state for maintaining roads, dikes, and canals. Village life was largely self-sufficient, governed by local gentry, landowners who had passed low-level exams, and elders, following customary laws. Families were the core unit, with multiple generations often living together under the authority of the eldest male. Filial piety, respect and obedience to parents and ancestors, was paramount. Foot binding for girls, though not universal and more common among wealthier families aspiring to status, remained widespread, symbolizing beauty and refinement despite causing lifelong pain and disability. In the cities, a different world thrived. Artisans produced exquisite goods, silks, porcelain, furniture, and lacquerware. Merchants, though officially low on the Confucian social scale, grew increasingly wealthy, especially those involved in interregional trade or the lucrative Canton system dealing with Europeans. They patronized the arts, built elaborate gardens and homes, and enjoyed urban entertainments like opera, tea houses, and storytelling. Education remained highly valued, seen as the path to social mobility through the imperial exams. Boys from families with means studied the Confucian classics intensely from a young age, hoping to pass the grueling multi-tiered exams and become officials, bringing prestige and wealth to their families. Women's lives were largely confined to the domestic sphere, managing the household and raising children. Their primary path to social standing was through bearing sons. Religion was a blend, ancestor worship was fundamental, Buddhism offered paths to salvation and comfort, Taoism provided philosophies on nature and longevity, and local folk deities were worshipped for protection and good fortune. Temples and shrines dotted the landscape. By the late 18th century, during the later years of Qianlong's reign, cracks began to appear beneath the glittering surface of the prosperous age. The sheer weight of the population boom became a massive burden. There simply wasn't enough new, good quality farmland to go around. Millions struggled on small plots or marginal land, vulnerable to any downturn. This led to widespread rural poverty, landlessness, and deepening inequality. The Qing bureaucracy, once admired for its efficiency, began to ossify and grow corrupt. Officials demanded increasing squeeze, bribes and extra fees from the populace to fund their lifestyles and networks. The emperor himself, though initially brilliant, became complacent in his old age. Qianlong entrusted vast power to a favorite courtier, Heshen, who became notoriously corrupt, amassing a personal fortune staggering even by imperial standards while the state's finances weakened. Military readiness also declined. The once feared 8 banners and green standard troops became underfunded, poorly trained, and more focused on garrison life than combat effectiveness. At the same time, a powerful new force was gathering beyond China's shores, the Industrial Revolution. European nations, particularly Great Britain, were undergoing massive technological and economic transformations. They produced goods more efficiently and sought new markets aggressively. Britain developed a particular craving for Chinese tea, silk, and porcelain. But China, under the restrictive Canton system, showed little interest in most European manufactured goods. This created a massive trade imbalance. Huge amounts of British silver flowed into China to pay for these luxuries. The British solution was opium. Grown in their colony of India, opium was smuggled into China in ever-increasing quantities by British traders and others, despite repeated Qing bans. The effects were devastating. Millions of Chinese, from laborers to officials and even soldiers, became addicted. Silver now began flowing out of China to pay for the illegal drug, causing economic havoc, inflation, and social decay. The Qing government was alarmed and outraged, seeing the opium trade as a poison destroying their people and their economy. The tensions over opium inevitably exploded into war. In 1839, the Daoguang Emperor sent a determined official, Lin Zexu, to Canton to stamp out the trade. Lin acted decisively, confiscating and destroying over 20,000 chests of British opium. This became the spark. Britain, outraged at the destruction of its property, even though it was illegal property, and seeking to force open Chinese markets, launched the First Opium War, 1839 to 1842. It was a mismatch of epic proportions. The Qing military, still relying on outdated ships, muzzle-loading cannons, and bows alongside some matchlock muskets, was no match for Britain's modern steam-powered gunboats, heavy artillery, and disciplined troops armed with rifles. The British Navy sailed up rivers, bombarded coastal cities, and easily defeated Qing forces. The Qing were utterly humiliated. The war ended with the Treaty of Nanjing in 1842, the first of the infamous unequal treaties. Its terms were harsh. China ceded the island of Hong Kong to Britain in perpetuity, opened 5 ports, including Shanghai, to British trade and residents, paid a massive indemnity, 21 million silver dollars, and granted British subjects extraterritoriality, meaning they were only subject to British law, not Chinese law, while in China. This treaty shattered the Qing's carefully maintained worldview of superiority. It exposed the dynasty's military weakness and technological backwardness to the world and, more importantly, to its own people. Worse was to come. The Taiping Rebellion, 1850 to 1864, led by a failed exam candidate named Hong Xiuquan who claimed to be the younger brother of Jesus Christ, erupted in the south. It wasn't just a rebellion, it was a full-blown civil war, one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. The Taiping promised radical social reforms, land redistribution, and equality, attracting millions of desperate peasants. They captured Nanjing, making it their capital, and controlled vast swathes of southern and central China for over a decade. The Qing government, its military in tatters, was nearly toppled. It only survived by relying heavily on regional Han Chinese armies, like the Hunan Army led by Xing Guofan and the Anhui Army led by Li Hongzhang, organized and funded at the local level. While these armies eventually crushed the Taiping, their existence shifted power away from the central Qing court and the Manchu elite towards powerful Han Chinese regional leaders. The rebellion caused unimaginable devastation. Estimates of deaths range from 20 to 30 million people. While reeling from the Taiping Rebellion, the Qing faced even more foreign aggression in the Second Opium War, 1856 to 1860. Britain, joined by France, sought to expand trading rights and legalize the opium trade. Once again, Qing forces were defeated. The climax was a moment of profound national trauma, the looting and burning of the old summer palace, Yuanmingyuan, near Beijing by British and French troops in 1860. This magnificent complex, a vast repository of imperial treasures and architectural wonders built over centuries, was deliberately destroyed in retaliation for the torture and killing of some diplomats and as a show of force. Emperor Xianfeng fled Beijing. The resulting treaties, Treaty of Tianjin and Convention of Beijing, were even more humiliating, more indemnities, the opening of more ports, including along the Yangtze River and in the north. The legalization of the opium trade, permission for Christian missionaries to operate freely inland, and the cession of the Kowloon Peninsula to Britain. Russia also took advantage, forcing China to cede huge territories north of the Amur River and east of the Ussuri River, where Vladivostok now stands. The Qing Dynasty seemed to be unraveling. In the 1860s and 1870s, a movement emerged, often called the self-strengthening movement. Led by pragmatic officials like Sun Guofan, Li Hongzhang, and Zhuo Zongtang, who had gained prominence suppressing the Taiping, its goal was simple: adopt Western military technology and industrial techniques to save the dynasty and fend off the foreigners. Chinese learning for the essence, Western learning for practical use, was the slogan. They established modern arsenals, shipyards, like the Jiangnan Arsenal in Shanghai, coal mines, and telegraph lines. They founded modern schools teaching foreign languages and sciences. They purchased modern weapons and even built a small modern navy. For a time, it seemed like China might be able to modernize on its own terms. They successfully suppressed other major rebellions, like the Nian Rebellion in the north and Muslim uprisings in the northwest and southwest. But the self-strengthening movement had deep limitations. It was piecemeal, focused mainly on military and industrial projects, and lacked central coordination or support from the conservative Manchu court. Crucially, it didn't touch the fundamental political and social structures of the empire. The underlying Confucian bureaucracy remained largely unreformed and often resistant. The limitations of the self-strengthening approach were brutally exposed in 1894 to 1895. Conflict erupted with Japan over influence in Korea, a traditional Qing tributary state. The Sino-Japanese War was a disaster for China. Japan, having undergone the radical Meiji Restoration, had transformed into a modern industrial and military power. The Qing's modernized Beiyang fleet, painstakingly built by Li Hongzhang, was decisively defeated at the Battle of the Yalu River and later destroyed in its home port of Weihaiwei. Japanese armies routed Qing forces on land in Korea and Manchuria. The Treaty of Shimonoseki in 1895 was a national catastrophe. China was forced to recognize the independence of Korea, which quickly fell under Japanese influence, cede the island of Taiwan and the Liaodong Peninsula, though Russia, France, and Germany pressured Japan to return Liaodong, pay a colossal indemnity, 230 million taels of silver, and open more ports to Japanese trade. The defeat by Japan, a nation long seen as a subordinate neighbor, was an even greater psychological blow than the losses to the Western powers. It proved that half measures at modernization were useless and shattered any remaining illusion of Qing's strength. The scramble for concessions intensified. Seeing China's weakness, European powers and Japan rushed to carve out spheres of influence along the coast and major rivers, demanding exclusive mining and railway rights. It looked like China might be dismembered entirely. This desperate situation sparked a bold, radical attempt at reform. In 1898, the young Guangxu emperor, influenced by progressive scholars like Kang Yuwei and Liang Qichao, launched the 100 Days Reform. Over a frantic few months, he issued a blizzard of decrees aiming to transform China, modernizing the education system, including science and Western learning, streamlining the bureaucracy, building a modern military, promoting industry, and even considering a constitutional monarchy. But the reforms threatened the immense power and privileges of the conservative Manchu elite, particularly the Empress Dowager Cixi, the real power behind the throne. After just 103 days, Cixi staged a coup, imprisoned the Guangxu emperor, rescinded almost all the reforms, and executed several reformist leaders. China's chance for top-down reform from within the system was crushed. The frustration and anger boiling among ordinary Chinese, particularly peasants, exploded in 1900. Fueled by natural disasters, economic hardship, and resentment against foreign missionaries and Chinese Christians, who were seen as protected by the unequal treaties, a mass movement known as the Boxer United in Righteousness, or simply Boxers, swept across northern China. The Boxers practiced martial arts and believed they were invulnerable to bullets. They targeted foreigners, Christian converts, and symbols of foreign influence like railways and telegraph lines. Initially suppressed by Qing authorities, the movement gained momentum. Crucially, the Empress Dowager Cixi, desperate and perhaps seeing an opportunity to expel the foreigners, decided to throw imperial support behind the Boxers in early 1900. In June, Boxers and imperial troops besieged the foreign legations in Beijing. This triggered a massive international response. An eight-nation alliance, Britain, France, Germany, Russia, Japan, the United States, Italy, and Austria-Hungary, organized a 20,000-strong force. They fought their way from the coast to Beijing, defeating Qing and Boxer forces. In August, they relieved the legations after a 55-day siege and then brutally occupied Beijing, looting the city and the Forbidden City. Cixi and the emperor fled in disguise to Xi'an. The aftermath was devastating. The Boxer Protocol of 1901 imposed crippling terms, a colossal indemnity, 450 million taels of silver, to be paid over 39 years with interest, equivalent to more than 10 times the government's annual revenue, the execution of high-ranking officials who supported the Boxers, the destruction of Chinese forts near Beijing, and the permanent stationing of foreign troops in the capital. China was forced to kneel, its sovereignty utterly compromised. The humiliation was complete, and the Qing's legitimacy was irreparably damaged. The Boxer disaster finally forced the Qing court, now with Cixi reluctantly back in charge in Beijing, to embark on more serious reforms than ever before, the new policies, Xinjiang. They abolished the ancient Confucian examination system in 1905, recognizing it was obsolete. They established new ministries, modernized the army into the new army, promoted industry and commerce, and even drafted plans for provincial and national assemblies. In 1908, they issued Principles of the Constitution, promising a constitutional monarchy within 9 years. But it was too little, too late. The reforms were often poorly implemented and only fueled demands for faster, more radical change. The new schools produced students exposed to revolutionary and nationalist ideas. The modernized new army, intended to protect the dynasty, became a hotbed of revolutionary sentiment. Provincial elites, empowered by the new assemblies, grew increasingly assertive. Meanwhile, revolutionary movements were gaining strength, led primarily by Sun Yat-sen and his Tongmenghui Revolutionary Alliance, founded in 1905. Sun's ideology, the three principles of the people, nationalism, democracy, and people's livelihood, resonated with many who saw the Qing as irredeemably weak, corrupt, and foreign. They advocated overthrowing the Manchus and establishing a republic. The death of both the Guangxu Emperor and Empress Dowager Cixi in 1908 left a void. The throne passed to the 2-year-old Puyi, with his father, the inexperienced Prince Chun, as regent. The regency proved ineffective. A trigger came in 1911. The Qing government, desperate for funds after the Boxer indemnity, nationalized provincial railway lines, planning to hand them over to foreign banks for loans. This infuriated provincial shareholders and elites in Sichuan and other provinces, sparking the railway protection movement. Protests turned violent. On October 10, 1911, revolutionaries within the new army staged an uprising in Wuchang, one of the 3 cities making up Wuhan. The Wuchang uprising succeeded surprisingly quickly. The revolution spread like wildfire across southern and central China. Province after province declared independence from the Qing. Seeing the dynasty collapsing, powerful military leaders, particularly Yuan Shikai, commander of the best Qing forces, the Beiyang army, who had been sidelined earlier, was recalled. Yuan, a master manipulator, negotiated with both the Qing court and the revolutionaries. He secured the abdication of the child Emperor Puyi in February 1912 in exchange for becoming the first president of the new Republic of China. The Qing Dynasty, and with it over 2,000 years of imperial rule in China, was over. So, what's the legacy of the mighty Qing Dynasty, China's final empire? It's incredibly complex. On one hand, they built the largest territorial China we know today, incorporating Tibet, Xinjiang, Mongolia, Manchuria, and Taiwan into a single entity governed from Beijing. They presided over a century of remarkable stability and cultural brilliance during the High Qing. Yet, their downfall was spectacular and traumatic. Their failure to adapt to the modern world, their internal corruption, their disastrous handling of foreign powers, and their ultimate collapse plunged China into decades of chaos, warlordism, civil war, and foreign invasion. The humiliation of the century of humiliation, starting with the Opium Wars, became a defining national trauma that still shapes China's view of the world and its drive for national rejuvenation today. The Qing experience created a deep distrust of foreign imperialism and a fierce desire for a strong, unified, and modern China capable of standing on its own. The tensions between tradition and modernization, central control and regional power, Han Chinese identity and multi-ethnic rule, all played out dramatically during the Qing and continue to echo. Their story is a powerful reminder that even the grandest empires are not immune to decay, that clinging to the past can be fatal in a changing world, and that the collision between tradition and modernity can reshape nations in profound and often painful ways. The Qing dynasty wasn't just the end of imperial China, it was the crucible that forged modern China, with all its complexities, ambitions, and ongoing struggles.